From Joshua, sent May 4th, 2004, 8:11 p.m. To Pearl, subject, hearing. So I guess you've heard about the controversy at the prison in Iraq, the abuse of Iraqi prisoners. It's been a strange past 2 days since I first heard. That's the same prison I'm heading to. A wave of feelings has rushed through me, mostly contempt, bewilderment. The photos are horrific, and that's not what I was trained to do. I don't exactly know how to process this. For the most part, I know what the leadership of interrogation facilities do, and I've also heard that the military police, which is who the six perpetrators are not well educated in the law of land warfare or the Geneva Conventions, of which interrogators have to be specialists. But when I hear the prisoners being called detainees, it troubles me. Detainees have fewer rights than prisoners of war. POWs have special status as lawful combatants, heightening their Geneva Convention provisions. Since these prisoners are being labeled other than POWs, I don't know just how far envelopes are being pushed. The angry side of me wants on the first plane and to be pinned my sergeant stripes as soon as possible so that I can have some authority and ensure that nothing of the sort happens under my watch. Then the what the hell am I doing side of me shows up, wondering what a blonde, blue-eyed Iowa boy is doing in Iraq in the first place, at least with Caesar's body armor and an M16. Always, Joshua. From Joshua, sent July 27th, 2004, 7:20 a.m. To Dad, subject, neither purse nor satchel. Well, today's my day off. I'm watching The Mission with my friend Tom, who is the ranking interrogator on our two-man team. Last night I also watched, for the second time, the PBS Frontline special on Pope John Paul II. Dad, I almost started crying 5 minutes into the movie, but there were two other guys in the room playing video games and listening to horrid music on the other side of my earphones. Hearing stories of his childhood, his success as a goalie in soccer, his acting, his poetry, the comments of the young women around him when he was a young priest who said that he was, quote, fully a man, but not like a man looking for girlfriends, but he was fully a man, unquote. It excites me, Dad. When I see the opening scenes of The Mission and I see three Jesuit priests walking through the jungles of South America with no possessions, nothing tying them down except for the church in whose service they have given their lives entirely, and practically, not just metaphorically, I just want to jump up and down. Dad, I don't want a life of possessions. I don't want a life filled with the many addictions and allegiances of civic life. I don't want to be a Democrat. I don't want to be a Republican. I don't want to be an American if that means forming my convictions and beliefs in accordance with something as mundane as dirt and committees and geopolitical interests. I belong to none of them. Moreover, I believe the church was intended as a sign of the world to come, something which human government cannot attain. I don't want to politic between the social justice of the Democrats and the personalist morality of the Republicans, neither of which have any tangible authority over issues of God and truth. I want to speak with authority from a position of authority, one ordained by God. I want to submit to an authority that is not of myself, and I want to authentically abandon all in the proper way which maintains Pauline love and does not evade life's issues for the wrong reasons. How shall I use my talents? I want to know what will most profit the church beyond Rome, beyond Canterbury, beyond Constantinople, and beyond the many American assemblies. How am I to be in her service? Freedom is not bought by pipelines being made in Afghanistan, nor by the major private corporations handling construction and oil distribution, Enron, Halliburton, who profit incredibly by the joint military venture tax breaks set forth by the Bush administration. Freedom is not made behind closed doors with Saudi regimes who espouse the very same Wahhabist Sunni ideas as the terrorists, because we fear losing their input into the American economy, which is over 7%. My contention with George Bush is not one of believing him malevolent, but rather believing him unwise and guilty of maligning God's freedom with mere political rhetoric. Political freedom certainly involves a whole lot of this dirty work because political freedom is a perversion of freedom, and it is an exclusive freedom which can only be offered to those who are the same as those offering it. We can only, quote, liberate a people by making them like us. Spiritual freedom is similar. It involves conversion. But spiritual conversion is optional, freely offered, freely rejected, and the converted are called to love the unconverted, not bend them to their will by saying regime change of the inner person. It is a myth and an illusion to suppose that political freedoms can ascend to the level of the gospel. It is also a form of blasphemy and idolatry. The more Christianity joins the moralistic banter of neoconservative Republican Christianity, the more democracy is delegitimized, the more the gospel is profaned, and the more we bow ourselves to a second master, one clad as an angel of light. There must be examples and a growing culture that is itself this example of the freedom which Christ instituted, not which was allegedly given at Plymouth Rock and written about in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. Nationalistic myths are what convince people to take up the sword. Yes, I think that we should take a little wine for our stomachs and not disdain the wisdom which is inscribed in nature for our survival and edification, i.e., modern medicine. Yes, I think that we should promote democracy and not disdain the offerings, be they imperfect, of political bodies. But Capitol Hill has replaced the Vatican, and hospitals and political parties have replaced the church as the, quote, new salvation, granting, quote, life and, quote, freedom to those who follow their teaching. We don't need the Eucharist, we have medicine. Democracy is now forced upon people like Christianity was during the Holy Roman Empire in the, quote, Christianizing of civilization. Now we're, quote, democratizing, and instead of the Pope or an emperor, we have the American president. I do not think that we should encourage those systems of government which most allow people to freely choose. I do think that we should encourage those systems of government which most allow people to freely choose, especially with regard to religion. But there are subtle concessions being made, Dad, concessions I don't want to allow in my life. I do not want to confuse the hope of God with the hope of men, nor the promises of God with the promises of men. I greatly fear that the future of the gospel is at stake in these confusions. What do we tell the people who do not hear the gospel, but hear the promises and pledges of society day in and day out, seeing also the continued injustices witnessed on television and in the news? Love, Joshua. From Joshua, sent August 31st, 2004, to JFLO, subject regarding Part 5 continued. Thoughts from an American Christian soldier. This morning I awoke, wrecked by anxiety. For a full 2 hours I could not move. From the moment I opened my eyes, all I could think of was failure, contradiction, falsity. For the past week or so, I have been writing a script to help chronicle my experiences of war. And so for the past few days, I've watched films such as Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, and Platoon as a means to help narrate what I experience. After watching films such as these, hearing the first-hand accounts of my forebears' tales of war, it seems to me as if war is not even a term I know how to use to describe my time here in the desert. War is supposed to be the threat of being easily annihilated, not the threat of annihilating with ease. The sacrifices made by my forebears from the Second World War are hard to comprehend. The beaches of Normandy, the winter journey to Berlin, the jungles of Guadalcanal, the massive force of destruction that they had to endure day in and day out in World War II is something I see now, but in fragments, in the attempts of an impoverished opposition setting off mortar attacks in 1 or 2 round bursts every other day. One of us is killed for about every 40 of them. Or there are the intertribal kidnappings, the ransoms that go to fund the resistance. The chaos is real, but I view it mostly from an ivory tower. The utter contradiction and hopelessness levied against my forebears in Vietnam, well-intending American men walking footpaths each day under orders that came to embody the very barbarism they sought to overthrow. I do not palpably sense or encounter here. I have my own paradoxes of barbarism, but the gravity is altogether different. My job is often grueling and mentally and emotionally exasperating, but I live in a place with bins full of the remains of packages sent from home that simply can't be consumed by individual soldiers. This cannot be true of everywhere on the battlefield, but in my corner of the world, we have buffets with consumer response cards, air conditioning, and internet cafes. I have been injured once, but only because I accidentally stabbed myself with a knife while cutting open a footlocker to pack all of the excess things I could not find a place to store in my living quarters. I am more likely to struggle from putting on weight than from losing it, from spending my money unwisely than from fear of not having a use for it, and from wasting my free time in entertainment than from waiting anxiously for the few times I am afforded it. Even the Eucharist sometimes feels like a product I am given, a thing consumed for the maintenance of morale. This experience of war is confusing at best. Before I became a cadet at West Point, I read a quote of a military statesman who wrote, "I study politics and war so that my sons may study mathematics and music." This was written hundreds of years ago, but I read it on a brochure for an academy I was then to attend in the coming months. Long before I ever decided to leave the academy, I remember thinking it ironic that I too would be going on to study, yet again, politics and war. Would it be in the hope that one day my children might gain the opportunity to study mathematics and music? For then one must ask, when will that day come? I recently made a man cry. I told him in Arabic that he was not a criminal and not a terrorist. He later told me that he had cried because it was the first time in many months that an American soldier, or anyone for that matter, had told him that he was not an evil man. The next day I thundered away at a different man who sat blankly calm with the knowledge that his lies could possibly put the man who had the previous day cried openly in front of me in prison for the greater portion of his life. And now I am faced with the decision of having to abandon their cases altogether because my job as an interrogator is not the enforcement of justice in criminal investigations, but merely obtaining intelligence relevant to the warfighting efforts of U.S. forces. The other day, one of my superiors talked to my interrogation team prior to a session. He told me, "These are the agents of Satan, gentlemen. They would rather slit your throat and die trying than spend the rest of their lives with the virgin they married the first time around, their wives." Unquote. It was now my turn to be the blank, expressionless one. This was a Christian man telling me this, obviously trying to impress upon me the reality of a jihadist belief in a paradise with 70 virgins and the like. But believing that evil is real does not mean that it is okay to believe that there are those who can completely be its embodiment. When the president stood in the National Cathedral and spoke about the moral dimensions of the war on terrorism, it was not a moment for Christians to show solidarity in the identification of evil, but a moment for Christians to repent in their having objectified it in the bodies of men. To believe that there are evil men only to be destroyed is to utterly disbelieve in the power of the resurrection. Anne Lamott wrote, "You can safely assume that you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do." To the legalist extremist Muslim, evil is something that can be eliminated by eliminating the evildoer. If a woman is perceived as indecent, kill her. If a man commits apostasy, kill him. I fear that the West has also adopted this view in certain of its policies to attempt to rid the world of terror. Evil cannot be destroyed by the destruction of things or persons. It can only be redeemed by those willing to lay down themselves for others. Evil has no existence of itself. It is simply the consequence of an amnesiac and bereft people. Goodness forgotten is goodness perverted. We must be that much more fervent in remembering and reiterating God's initial words over his creation. It is good. When we know not what we do, God grant us the grace to forgive, so that we might in turn remember how we too once were forgiven. Every day I talk with the enemy, but I do not see an embodiment of him who opposes goodness. If we approach the war on terrorism with the fervor of a Christian jihad against Islam, our battle is already lost, for we have become what we opposed and we are now the fundamentalists. Our battle is not one of flesh and blood, but against the spiritual powers and principalities which rule this present darkness. We cannot allow ourselves to be caught up in war mode against a fleshly enemy, or the true enemy is already within us, and we have failed to believe in the power of redemption which we say we believe has saved us. As James has told us, faith without works is dead. Orwell once said that we sleep comfortably in our beds because violent men are willing to conduct violence on our behalf. Uncomfortably, I have known this to be true, yet I am also quite guilty of having fallen in step with the pathology of a blood-purchased liberty and self-sanctification. My comfort and liberty must not be won by the sacrifices of a new and foreign poor, now paying the price for our moral failings of diplomacy, economy, and statesmanship, turning our republic into an empire. The memory of those who willingly died in World War II is tarnished every time we resurrect them as an analogy to our alleged war against terror and tyranny. The fallen world demands the imposition of justice and the rule of law, but evil cannot be destroyed, it can only be redeemed. In him, Joshua. From Joshua, sent October 18th, 2004, to home, subject, meaning. So, I just experienced why it is I'm here in Iraq. Other than all the struggles I've been wrestling with, I just met my reason. A young foreign jihadist who said he might kill me if he had the chance. That is, as long as I am a US soldier in a Muslim land. The gospel came out of his mouth unwittingly while trying to convert me to Islam. It was beautiful. I was dumbstruck. I left praising Christ and thanking God for this enemy. I confessed to him my sins and asked him to look at his own. I'm certain that this interrogation was not doctrinal by Army standards. Pardon my bluntness, but to hell with the Army and their doctrines. Today was a moment when life mattered. I did not try to justify myself, but instead asked God and my enemy simply for mercy. What is terrifying is that this jihadist genuinely wanted my conversion, for me to see the emptiness of, quote, American beauty, unquote. He talked of the peace and happiness I would find in, quote, true religion, unquote. And I felt him actually care for me, desire for my good. I asked him why he came to Iraq to kill, and then he asked me why I did. Quote, your Lord, our prophet Isa, tells you to turn the other cheek, to love those who hate you. Why do you not do this? Unquote. I replied, you're right, and then asked him when he would, quote, go and do likewise, unquote. He said vengeance was his right. I lacked the power to challenge him in any way that I did not challenge myself, because such ideas of love and forgiveness and compassion are not fully manifest and incarnate in me, tangibly and practically to be seen and felt, as if to say, look at the love I give you. After all was said and done, we ended with a feeling of mutual respect. I left and I prayed I would be given the chance to see him one day in the future when I could say, I left that world behind me, so can you. Love, Joshua. Eternal rest grant unto Joshua, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. May he rest in peace. Amen.